Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 12 of My Hero Academia. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, the situation was pretty dire. 13 got mangled, as did Eraserhead. And, the students were holding their own reasonably well against the cannon fodder, but as soon as that runs out, all they have to contend with are Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and Namu. And that's some serious business. But I guess there was a ray of sunshine in that All Might has finally arrived. And, it's a good and a bad thing, because on the one hand, All Might is here, but on the other hand, he is extremely aggravated at what's going on. He's known for showing up and having a smile. He's not smiling, and, I'm sort of put in mind of, when like a normally calm and collected person flips out over something, like, it's not good, man. So, if I recall, All Might was just sort of headed on his way over anyways, and running into Ida was merely incidental. So I guess it's nice that, if nothing else, Ida is still going to bring more reinforcements with him. I think everybody could reasonably expect All Might to save the day and have that be the end of it, but, no sense in, sparing any expense for this. Man, I think that's particularly evocative, that All Might, rather than just loosening his tie, just tears it off. I like that Midoriya also sort of picks up on the fact that All Might's not smiling. Because, that really is sort of, I guess, in opposition to his entire brand, for want of a better term. The idea is that he is such a peerless hero that he can't help but smile because nothing is really a problem for him. And I mean, when you get down to it, all this cannon fodder, these ordinary villains, they're not going to be a problem for All Might. And, thinking about it, it's easy not to think too much of Eraserhead considering how he was earlier on, but I guess some of it has to do with him being more a superhero than a teacher, but the fact that he went so far for his students, I think, it's definitely a point in his favor, if nothing else. So it's interesting that Shigaraki is unsettled by all of this, you know. It seems that All Might showing up like this is, I guess, kind of violating his plans, you know. I would assume, you know, the idea was that they wanted to get the drop on All Might. You know, Shigaraki's already noticing that All Might isn't as fast as he assumed he would be, even though he is very fast. You know, we don't have an exact timeline, but All Might's had a pretty long career, so, you know, it only makes sense that, you know, as he gets older, he would eventually become weaker just because, you know, time is insidious and age catches up to everyone, even All Might. It's interesting, you know, because, like, that's not really something that necessarily comes up in shonen stuff like this. Yeah, so this is unfortunate that even though All Might's wailing on Namu, it's not really doing anything. I mean, just looking at this Namu thing, you know, I feel like maybe aiming for the exposed brain would be a good way to do it, but, you know, I can only assume All Might doesn't actually want to kill the thing if that can be avoided. Now, I do wonder about the wisdom of Shigaraki sort of talking about the quirks involved here. Because, you know, if he really does want to kill All Might, I feel like, you know, you should just sort of, not disclose the quirks of your associates. I mean, surely this isn't going to be the end of it this early in the episode, but even so. You know, Midoriya's making a good rational point here, too, that, you know, even though the villains have a plan here, if the students were to get involved, that would likely only cause problems, because, you know, them getting caught up in collateral damage is bad enough, but them being taken hostage is even worse from All Might's perspective. Oh dear. So, I guess it makes sense, but Midoriya is vaguely aware of what the situation with All Might is. You know, that he's already sort of reached his limit of using his powers, and that everything from here on out is basically him straining and running on fumes. It's already been established at this point that by All Might doing that, he essentially just continues to make things worse, so he has even less time going forward. I mean, if All Might has to really shift into high gear to fight Namu and burn through whatever time he has left, this is, in a way, almost like a last stand. And unfortunately, only Midoriya is really cognizant of this, that Midoriya, you know, only he really knows that All Might is in more trouble than is presented. I guess it's especially clear now, considering that between Kurogiri intervening and Namu just being prodigiously strong, he's managed to inflict a lasting wound onto All Might, sort of piercing his side. Like, that's decidedly not good. So it seems as though this was sort of the plan all along. You know, all of the villains would work together to sort of cripple All Might. And I guess what makes matters even worse is that the Namu has unknowingly sort of injured All Might where his old injuries were already, I guess, congregated for want of a better term, So any wound the Namu deals is doubly effective, I mean, we saw those gnarly scars in an earlier episode. So, it would seem as though the villains have a rather insidious plan, but by disclosing it, they've sort of robbed it of some of its effectiveness, I feel. Kurogiri with his portals intends to bisect All Might, and that could work, but by telling him, I feel like you render it less effective. I mean, it could certainly still work, and it's not like Midoriya knows about the plan, but I feel like he feels he has no choice but to intervene regardless of the risk. So here we go. Bakugo is finally doing something good. And he's sort of couching in terms like, I don't want Midoriya to have all the glory, I'm gonna do something. And similarly, Todoroki has intervened to freeze part of Namu. It is rather nice that the particularly effective students are intervening and helping. Because I guess when you get down to it, Todoroki and Bakugo are probably two of the best in terms of actually fighting effectively with these villains. Their quirks are rather powerful and they have enough control over them to use them effectively. I mean, Kirishima, I suppose he'd be affected too, but in a more defensive capacity, considering how tough he seemingly is. So things are looking increasingly grim for the villains, but it's not like All Might and the students are out of the woods just yet, Shigaraki, we know he can sort of disintegrate things, but he hasn't really done too much yet. He's just sort of hanging in the background and watching. I've kind of got some mixed opinions about the students helping, because this certainly is something they should do morally, but, given that they are students, actually engaging a villain is semi-verboten, and, I guess given the extenuating circumstances, there's not much around that they could sort of do to skirt the issue, but I don't know. I don't think there's going to be too much about it regarding the moral quandary, but, this is sort of like a recurring theme that crops up again and again. So it would seem as though Bakugo has correctly deduced the true nature of Kurogiri. That little armored bit is his body. And therefore, if he wants to damage something, that would certainly be the thing to do. So, despite being rather villainous and bloodthirsty, Bakugo's got the right idea, Sometimes you just have to threaten a villain a little bit. So the Namu here is rather interesting in that it seems to be rather, obedient and mindless, and rather monstrous on top of that. Despite having its frozen limbs shattered, they just sort of regrow rapidly at that. Shigaraki lets slip that it has more than one quirk, and that it's been engineered specifically to fight All Might. So, if it can nullify shock and regenerate and is presumably super fast and super strong, like, this really is a thing bred to kill All Might. One has to wonder that if the Namu just, punched Bakugo, how on earth is he even alive? But, it would seem as though All Might interceded on his behalf. Yeah, so this is decidedly not good. This is sort of like that trope where the hero takes a heavy hit to protect someone else. And, maybe this didn't do any lasting damage to All Might. It probably didn't feel too good. So I find it interesting that Shigaraki is trying to play morally superior here. That Midoriya tried to kill me earlier. And, he's conveniently leaving out the part where Midoriya was doing that in defense of somebody he was trying to kill. This is a really dishonest argument he's making here that's like, oh, when you use violence, it's bad because I say so, even though, in this instance, in its entirety, you are acting in self-defense. I'm glad All Might's not falling for any of the bait here. He's calling him out saying, you're just trying to make yourself sound noble. You are evil. You're doing this because you're evil and because you enjoy doing evil, so don't waste your breath. Although, to some degree, it does seem like All Might is kind of falling for the bait in that he's telling the other students to stay out of this. I mean, to some degree, they should. But at the same time, Todoroki working from long range, I feel like something like that could help. Or at the very least, the students could collectively hold off one of the villains. That doesn't seem like it would be beyond the pale. Well, I guess it seems like the kids don't have much of a choice, seeing as how Shigaraki says he's going to take care of them. Alright, so here you have it. This is probably the best scene in the entirety of this first season here, where All Might decides that, I'm a hero. I have to do something heroic here. Even if my power is waning, I have to make it last. And I like the pretense that all the students thought they would be able to fight around all these massive shockwaves from the collisions. It's kind of spectacular to witness where, all the others, they can scarcely even maintain their footing in the presence of this titanic fight. Now, I think All Might's making a bit of a semantic argument here when he says that you said the quirk was absorption, not nullification, therefore there has to be an upper limit. I mean, that doesn't necessarily track, but I guess, for the purpose of this, it's good enough. And if nothing else, I like the idea that, despite this monster being bred specifically to kill All Might's preferred solution is essentially just crank it so far into overdrive that you overcome it through sheer force regardless. It is nice that All Might finally seems to be getting the upper hand here, that regardless of the Namu's ability to absorb force, he's still able to throw it around and batter it, and ultimately just sort of keep it at bay. I really like it that all these other students who aren't aware that All Might has showed up, if they weren't aware before, they certainly are now, considering the entire dome is shaking from the force of All Might's punch. I don't know what exactly it is, but it's little things like that that I really enjoy. I guess, sort of like thinking and following through with how the physics would work. I mean, it's not like it's exceptionally realistic or anything like that, but, I guess it doesn't have to be. It's cool. So, All Might, he won. But the real question is, how long can he keep up this appearance? He was definitely pushing his limit, and on top of that, he's now wounded. He certainly doesn't want to reveal his secret to the entire class. So I feel like people are going to have to hide things and act judiciously. I mean, Shigaraki and Kurogiri are still around. Granted, they don't really have a chance now. At least in theory, I like that All Might kind of has to bluff them down. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.